What is a conflict? That's not so simple as it seems to be. Conflicts can emerge from completely different causes. There is not you can't define the kind of causes. And these causes not only lie in persons. There are also kinds of conflicts where the cause lies in the system or the organization. Accidents can be avoided, but that does not apply to conflicts. Conflicts cannot be avoided on principle. And conflicts are not a sign of bad management. Sometime I met an old couple married for almost 50 years, and they said, "We never had any conflicts in our marriage." That means nothing moved during their 50 years of marriage. Everywhere where is a movement, a development, conflicts arise and cannot be avoided. Conflicts cannot always be explained by our Aristotelian logic, and that is a very difficult part of conflicts. And finally, in conflicts, not only one party may be right. Normally, we know from Aristotle that only one argument can be right and the opposite cannot be right, but that does not apply to conflicts. Both parties can be right. There are different kinds of conflicts, and I will only list up the groups of conflicts, and every group is subdivided into several individual kinds of conflicts, but that's too much for today's presentation. There are personal conflicts, that the cause lies in the individual person. And there are pair conflicts, several kinds of pair conflicts. There are triangle conflicts where 3 people are involved. And there are group conflicts where a complete group is involved in a conflict. And as well, organizational conflicts where the cause of the conflict lies in the organization. Institutional conflicts, and we know in our institutions there are a lot of conflicts just due to the institution itself. People are not born for working in large organizations. Mr. Tademan can tell a lot of stories about that. But we force them to do so. And that is always combined with conflicts. And there are finally system conflicts. In total, there are about 25 different kinds of conflicts. And you can assign each conflict to one kind of conflict. There are 6 standard solutions to conflict. I only give a very short presentation. The full script is about 50 or 60 pages. That would be too much for today. That would last until tonight. Only just the standard solutions to conflicts, in total 6. And one we already learned, that is that people try to flee from a conflict. The flight, that is the lowest kind of or level of development. If we have an accident, our first reaction is to flee from the place of conflict. And many people do that. The next one level higher, is the extermination, well known from history. A exterminates B, and then the conflict is at its end because the conflict partner is not anymore alive. Next one, higher level of development, subjugation. A is subjugated under B, he loses his freedom, but he saves his life, which is not true for extermination. The next one is the delegation, and that is in our civilization. We have been very successful in delegating conflicts to a third party. The problem is that emotional conflicts cannot be delegated to a third party because you cannot delegate emotional competence to anybody else, and therefore many pair conflicts cannot be delegated to a third party. But our judges, our courts, can have the role of party C. Next one is a compromise, where a part of the interests of each party can be included into the conflict solution. A good compromise is where the important things can be included in the compromise. A bad compromise, which we many times see in politics, is that only on the lowest level of the interests a compromise is achieved. And finally, the consensus, where both agree on the common interest of A and B, and nobody has to give up some of his interests. So these are 6 kinds of conflict solutions, and I have never found any conflict with its solution which did not fit into this scheme. Up there is the higher level of development, and down is relapse. Okay, this we have used in our course. And we have also used a specific procedure on how to proceed when we have a conflict and try to solve that conflict. The situation was always given. I put the situation into the net, and this was always a description, half or 3/4 of a page. And these case studies never represent the reality. The reality is, in all cases, more complex. And in all conflicts, nobody gives you a description of the case on one page with all information you need. So that's a little bit artificial, but it's good enough for practicing this procedure. In the discussion, we have first is the description of the situation that's given, or a conflict in reality, where we have to collect the information ourselves. In the discussion, we have to cover the following items: the parties involved and their interests. This is necessary to finally come to a good solution. Who is involved and who follows which interests? That's not, in reality, not always very so simple to find out what their interests are. Sometimes it's a little bit complicated, but it's essential to find that out. The next one is the critical point. That may be the cause of the conflict or something that leads to the cause of the conflict. You can ask the question, if the critical point would not be, or were not existing, would have the conflict emerged. Without the critical point, there would not be a conflict. That is also not so simple to find out the critical point. The problem to be solved, I believe that in my industrial career, that was the question which I asked very often when I had one of my co-workers in front of my desk and he told me something mostly he told me a solution of a problem, I always ask, which problem do you want to solve? In many cases, they did not know, but they had a solution. So I had a sign which was a gift of our American president in mahogany with a brass saying on it, are you here with a solution or are you part of the problem? And mostly they have been part of the problem. So that's also an essential point of the discussion, the problem to be solved. The kind of conflict, we have spoken about the kinds of conflicts like personal conflicts, pair conflicts, triangle conflicts, group conflicts, system conflicts, and institutional conflicts. The principles or help from the script, from the know-how we have about conflicts and conflict solutions. And these principles confine the room for actions. We have a certain room for action, what to do in order to solve the conflict, but the principles confine the room. The potential alternative solutions, what could we do with their pros and cons? So this was the discussion, and I will just go into the critical point that represents the cause of the problem or leads to the cause of the problem, the conflict. Question, if the critical point were not existing, would have the conflict develop? Alternative solutions, they follow directly from the parties involved and their interests. They follow from the critical point. They follow from the problem to be solved. This is very important. The kind of conflict and the confinement by any principles which are part of the know-how we have in order to solve conflicts, as well as from the 6 solutions to conflict. We can just walk through the 6 solutions to conflicts. Is flight the right solution? Is extermination of the opponent the right solution? Should we delegate the problem? So should we subjugate one of the partners below the others? Is there the chance to develop a compromise, or is there even at the highest level of development to develop a consensus? The solution is selected from all alternative solutions. We saw that we discuss and evaluate the alternative solution with its pros and cons, and we select the best one, which solves the problem. How the solution solves the conflict and the negative consequences of the solutions. Sometimes when we hear from, in politics, from our politicians, that there is no alternative to the solution they have selected, then it just means they don't want to have the negative consequences. They don't like the negative consequences. There are always more than one solution, but maybe they don't like the others, maybe even because of personal reasons. Now, from the 4 case studies, I will go shortly into one of these, and first I will present the situation, describe it shortly. The situation, it is called the trainee. There is a trainee which is called Henry Stevens, and he works on his dissertation on the field of econometrics. And he wants himself to prepare himself for the start of his professional career, and he has undertaken to work for 12 weeks as a trainee for the famous consultancy Strategy Consulting. That's a quite normal situation. Somebody wants to prepare himself for his professional career and makes or works as a trainee in a company. Henry is delegated to a project team that is engaged to identify cost reduction potentials for a mobile phone firm. That could be McKinsey or any other consulting firm. The project manager, the boss of Henry, is Dieter Mauser, and he is a senior consultant of the consultancy. And after several years of practice, he is very determined and result-oriented. He is responsible for the financial success of his projects, and he employs Henry mostly for auxiliary tasks like producing presentation charts, drawing copies for handouts, and cooking coffee. Henry addresses Dieter and asks for getting an adequate job as part of the project because he wants to learn something, and cooking coffee is not the right task for him in order to prepare himself for his professional career. So he addresses his boss and says, I want to have some more challenging work to do. Dieter does not want to spend more than 3 minutes on the conversation because he is very determined and result-oriented. He answers that the tasks assigned to Henry are no accident or error, but correspond with his long-time experience with many trainees. If he had to train the trainees, he would lose valuable capacity that could never be balanced by the trainees' contributions. So if he would spend any time for training, then the time is not available for concentrating on the project, and that's not economic. And therefore, he just gives Henry very simple tasks where he can make a contribution but doesn't learn anything. Therefore, he does not expect Henry to do more than he is instructed. And this contradicts the company philosophy of strategy consulting Henry has read in the company's high-gloss brochure. Okay, the consultancy employs trainees in order to see them working and make an offer to join the company to the best of these trainees. That's the intention of the consultancy. The interest of Dieter Mauser as a project manager is the economic of his project. Henry consults an internal coach, Mark Severs, who himself is an experienced project manager. Henry explains his problem to Mark. Mark takes Dieter for an excellent professional, which he really is. He advises Henry to try a second time and make a precise proposal for his own project contribution. Henry follows this advice, but Dieter does not go into it. Which advice would you give Henry? It's very simple. So let's apply the procedure and concentrate first on the discussion. Or short repetition, Henry wants to participate in more challenging tasks. Due to being efficient, Dieter does not want to spend time on training with Henry. He delegates only simple tasks to Henry. Henry tries a second time, but without success. The coach, Mark, cannot help. Okay. Parties involved and their interest. We follow these several items in our procedure. There's the trainee Henry Stevens. Henry Stevens wants to prepare himself for the start of his professional career. He wants to collect professional experience. The task assigned to him do not offer him much to learn. he pursues his own interest irrespective of those of the project. He's not interested in economic success of the project, but in his getting more experience. That is Henry Stevens. The next one is the project manager, Dieter Mauser. He is responsible for the financial success of his project. From this point of view, Henry can make his most efficient contribution to the project by taking care of the tasks assigned to him. These tasks have to be done. Even cooking coffee is very important because the consultants work very hard, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, and need some coffee and need a lot of charts for presentations and need a lot of copies for the handouts to the management and so on. He applies the conflict solution of subordination by limiting Henry's self-determination. That's his conflict solution. Who else is involved? That's the consultancy. Of course they are involved because the consultancy uses the practical training in order to get to know potential employees. They can see the trainees working and determine whether they meet their requirements. They want to motivate the excellent trainees to join the consultancy. And they pursue their goal to recruit new blood. And finally, they have made a contract with Henry as a trainee. So they are involved in the conflict. We should not forget the consultancy. And then there is the coach, Mark Severs. He tries to achieve a compromise between the conflict parties and Dieter and Henry. He himself is an experienced project manager, but he does not have the disciplinary power and can only give advice. He has no power to give instructions to any other project manager. He can just try to find a compromise. These are the parties involved and their interests. The critical point. I give you 30 seconds to find out what the critical point is. Henry and Dieter pursue contradicting interests. The interests are contradicting. Henry wants to have challenging tasks, and Dieter wants him to do simple auxiliary tasks. The conflict, actually there are two different conflicts in this case study. One is between Dieter and Henry and Mark, and the other is between Dieter and the consultancy, because there's also a conflict because Dieter has contradicting goals compared to what the company has. The company wants to employ trainees in order to get new blood into the company, and Dieter is just interested in his own interest, mainly in the financial success. Our question was, what would we advise Henry? Which advice would we give Henry? So the second conflict is not a conflict which Henry can solve, and we cannot give him any advice how to solve the second conflict between the project manager, Dieter, and the consultancy. Here only the first conflict is concerned. Which advice would you give Henry? Anyhow, Henry is not in a position to solve the second conflict. Okay, that's the conflict. Now the kind of conflict. The conflict results from different ideas of the own role and the one of the other conflict party. See, Henry has an idea about his own role and the role of Dieter. Dieter has an idea about Henry's role and his own role, but they contradict. So we have a typical role conflict. None of the conflict parties is willing to meet the role expectation of the other conflict party. That's a typical role conflict. Henry wants to learn something and expects Dieter to give him a chance to do so. And Dieter wants to achieve a good project result and to use Henry's capacity for work as efficient as possible. Next, the problem to be solved. Which problem is to be solved? It's Henry's problem that he tries to solve. Henry has to find a way of how to use the practical training for preparing his professional career. Somebody may mean that his problem is to convince Dieter, but that's maybe one of the potential solutions. That's not the problem he has to solve. He has to solve the problem how he can be successful to prepare himself for his professional career. And there are different alternatives how to solve that. These are the alternative solutions: the room of action, escape. We saw that's the lowest level of conflict solution, to escape from the conflict. He quit the job and applies to another consultancy. Then his conflict is solved because he moves himself away from the place of conflict. Henry will lose valuable time. We also should assess or evaluate the different conflict solutions. He could accept his role that Dieter has assigned to him, the conflict solution subordination or subjugation. But then he will waste his time. He will work for 12 weeks for the consultancy without learning anything except cooking coffee and making copies. Delegation, he could try to get on another project within the same consultancy. Henry has a contract with the recruiting department of the consultancy. Recruiting has confirmed Henry's role expectation by communicating the company philosophy in that glossy brochure they gave Henry. Therefore, the recruiting department should be the right addressee for Henry. Or he could find a compromise, try again to convince Dieter. Henry tried 2 times, one time assisted by Mark, the coach, in order to realize his role expectation, but without success. And as far as we know now, he will not have additional arguments. A new attempt will fail since there are no new arguments to convince Dieter. The role expectations are still the same. That was the compromise, or to achieve a consensus. But if we can't get a compromise, then we can't get a consensus. Now our solution, how the solution solves the conflict. Henry should consult the recruiting department of the consultancy and ask to be assigned to another project. They gave him the impression that he could learn something as a trainee. Before starting with a new project, he should be very cautious and he should negotiate with a new project manager and get agreement on his tasks. What he did not do with Dieter. Negative consequences, he has to spend more time because the time he already wasted is just gone. It is not Henry's job to remedy the organizational problem within the consultancy, that the consultancy gets to an agreement with the project managers, that the project managers fulfill the role expectation of the consultancy. Thank you very much.